teachers, today we're talking about how to teach clowns by Joaquin Turina. This is from his suite called The Circus. It sounds like this. I wanted to get far enough in there that you could hear all the changes that happen. This is a programmatic piece that sounds like a bunch of clowns at the circus doing their act. And they do lots of different things throughout the 2 pages that we have of clowns here. The whole suite is really fun. There's various members of the circus. There's a fanfare at the beginning. Probably the most well-known movement of this suite is called aerialists, or sometimes it's translated trapeze artists. And that's a great piece too. I just wanted to make a video about clowns because I love all the big chords. So if you're not familiar with Joaquin Turina, I would commend to you this collection. It's published by Schott, but it's edited by Maurice Hinson. And it just has several pieces for students by Turina. This book has a lovely introduction to him with biographical information as well as a photograph. He lived from 1882 to 1949, and while he was from Spain and spent a lot of his adult life in Spain, he did, like every other good musician at that time in Europe, train in Paris. So Turina actually knew Debussy and Ravel, and I really feel like a lot of his pieces for students are on the same wavelength as Debussy's Children's Corner. Certainly have some influence from the Impressionist style, but with a very large amount of Spanish flair to them. And many of the titles of other pieces are things like Fiesta or A City in Spain. So they're really fun, especially if students who like the more dramatic flair, which is most of my pre-college students. All right, so this piece has a lot of big chords, and we're going to talk about that. It also has these rapidly changing ranges, low and high on the piano, changes in time signature, as well as change in tempo. So at the beginning it says Allegro Burlesco, that's that opening chord section, and we're in 2/4. And then in measure 20, it's just marked in 3. I don't know why the time signature says 3. It really should be 3/4, and it's marked Andante. That's the part with the glissandi. And then we have an Allegro section in 3/8. And then we kind of go back and do the Allegro, Burlesco, and the Andante again. So it's cycling through these different acts that the clowns are doing, or different actions that they're doing as part of their act. And by all means, have fun with your students imagining what the different parts are. So I always imagine that this first part is just the clowns marching in to the circus arena to do their act. And maybe the glissandos are some sort of slide down or something being thrown way up in the air and falling down. And maybe this part is more of a juggling act or a dance or something like that. So again, have fun with your students. Don't teach a piece like this without doing something with your imaginative brain in this. To that end, our students really should practice this very much in sections and kind of treat each section as a little mini piece with its own tempo and its own character. And we don't want to mix them up. It needs to be just sections that are juxtaposed right next to each other that are entirely different. Hinson recommends that this first Allegro Burlesco section should be around 120. I don't know that your student has to play it quite that fast, but something near there. And this is where we have this opportunity to work on releasing tension in big chords. We also have quarter notes in the left hand and eighth notes in the right hand. It's not back and forth eighth notes like this. The left hand needs to hold the quarter notes a little longer to have that kind of constant longer tenuto feel on the bottom while the right hand is shorter. And yes, we have 4-note chords here. This is kind of like a sus. We have E flat major, and then whatever you want to call that one at the end there. I'm not sure that analyzing those is so important as it is making sure your student is comfortable and releasing between those. We're also going to have some bigger stretches later in the Allegro section. So for that part down there, I'm looking at measure 32. I would start with octaves. And you might have a student whose hand is big enough to do 4, or you might just have to do 5. And I definitely have to use pedal in order to make that legato there. In other videos, I've talked about how I teach octave technique, but just to quickly review, I work on octave scales first, with releasing back to natural hand shape in between each of those. What we really don't want is a claw hand or a fixed position with no flexibility in the wrist and the hand itself. That's going to build up a lot of tension, which can eventually cause injury and pain in your students. But it also doesn't allow for a big, full, warm sound either. It blocks off all the arm weight that you might put in. And at 32, what you really want is this grand, full sound. So you need to work on how you're going to navigate that with your students. And if you see any claw hand happening, stop them and work on it. Same thing at the beginning. You can really do kind of like a push-off idea with your right hand here, or follow through into the keys and get a big, nice sound on that. So that part is not super hard. Students usually figure that out in about a week. They figure out what these weird chords are and hearing on the top of these. Now your hands are overlapping each other, so you need to decide, is your left hand thumb going over your right hand, or do you want to do it the opposite? I don't know that I have a strong opinion on that, so you can decide what feels best for you. In measure 16 and 18, we have these accents. I really think you have to fall into that and kind of flick your wrist a little bit and then go down the triplet. Those are 16th note triplets. I probably wouldn't spend a whole lot of time other than making sure my students know where 1 and 2 and is in the measure, and then just demonstrate it. It's really almost like a grace note or something, more like an ornament than something you want to precisely play rhythmically. Okay, this brings us to the Andante section. First time we have B flat octave. And these are kind of like one impulse. You fall in one time and you follow through. I would say 3 on A, 2 on G for those middle notes. Make sure your student reads these left-hand chords correctly, and then glissando. Rest in measure 22. And really pop with a wrist flick this chord. It's got an accent. Pedal off so you get that lovely, you've had this down, and then whoop. I've sometimes imagined with my students that that's a balloon popping, or maybe it's one of those funny big guns that pops out. Whatever, have fun with it. Regarding the glissando, really the best technique for this would be to use your thumb here and brace it with your hand coming down. Students oftentimes complain about glissandos being uncomfortable or painful, and so number one, you don't have to practice it many times. You got to know where you're going, and you got to know how fast the gesture is going to be. You can put a Band-Aid on if you want to protect your cuticle. Don't play it a million times, but they do need to know what the technique is. Now you could even probably just use the pads of your fingers if you really wanted to and you got a good sound. I don't think there's only one right way to play a glissando. But help them navigate that, and then remind them they don't have to practice it every time. They can go through and just, mock glissando. Now, it's important to note in the second Andante section, which is measure 77 at the very end, it's a different key. So we're on D flat this time, and there's no rest at the beginning of measure 79. So they are different. 1, 2, 3. The glissando goes right into that D flat. And then at the end, my students are always tempted to not play this ending either fortissimo or accented enough. You should certainly consider some redistribution of putting the left hand, instead of playing, put this D in your right hand, like this. I think that's much easier to play than moving like that. So, oops, I played it in the wrong octave. Which actually is something that students do all the time. They play lots of parts of this piece in the wrong octave. So again, compartmentalize it. Practice this little section, this little section, this little section. Take time to move, find your place when you're in those learning stages, and then practice the jumps and getting places on time. Thankfully, a lot of these places have a rest involved when you are moving. So again, this is easier than it seems because Turina has done a masterful job of making it possible for our hands on the keyboard. I hope that gives you a few ideas on how to play this piece. I'm gonna link an album recording of all of the pieces in the Circus suite. If you've never listened to Turina before, go look him up. If you have similar 20th century intermediate or upper intermediate repertoire that you'd like me to cover in a video, leave that in the comments below. And best wishes in all your teaching.